Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be doing a demo review of a dupe. Yes, I'm doing my first dupes video for you guys, and I'm going to be seeing if the Wet n Wild Rose in the Air palette is a dupe for the Modern Renaissance palette by Anastasia Beverly. As you can see, side-by-side comparison, they're pretty similar. One thing they are not similar about is the price tag on this one. For 14 shadows is $49 US, and this one for 10 shadows is $4.99. So obviously there's a huge difference in price, but as you can see, the colors are very similar. This one has 2 shimmers in it, this one has 3, but some of the the main colors in this palette is actually in this palette. So I'm going to be doing a demo of the look I'm currently wearing. Half my face is Modern Renaissance and half my face is Wet n Wild. And I don't know if you guys can tell a difference. If you can, leave it below now. But I can't tell a difference, and I've got up close and personal with this look and I still can't tell a difference. So I'm also going to be doing some swatches, because sometimes swatches are a little deceiving because they look, you can tell that they are different, but swatches are different than actually putting them on. So that's why I want to do both things for you guys, so you guys can see that even though they're a smidge different, if they are, they look identical on the eyes. So like I said, there's a few things that are different. One palette has 14 shadows where the other one has 10, and then the price point on it. And then actually you get more with this palette than you do with this palette. So with the Modern Renaissance palette, you get 14 shades for 0.28 ounces. With the Wet n Wild, you get 0.35 ounces. So you actually get more with these 10 shades than you do with these 14 shades. Like I said, we can do a demo, we can do some swatches, and then you guys can judge for yourself. I think if you're wanting to save some coins, you might want to get this. So I definitely highly recommend this palette, even though I love this palette. But the pigmentation, I mean, you can't really go wrong with the fact that this $4.99 palette has the same pigmentation almost as this one, which is way more expensive. They are both cruelty-free, which is a big plus in my book, so that's really good. But yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and swatch these for you guys so you guys can see them side by side, and then I will let you guys watch the demo of this look, and I will see you guys in a little bit. Okay, so as you can see, both palettes are very similar in color. So let's just go ahead and do some swatches for you guys right now. So I feel like the Anastasia color is actually a little lighter, and then the Wet n Wild is actually more of a bone shade, so that's a little bit different, but the consistency of them and the pigmentation is pretty much the same. So that's the first 2 shades. Okay, so next you have the dupe for Raw Sienna. So the top shade is actually the Wet n Wild shade, the bottom shade is Raw Sienna, and I cannot tell a difference. Now these don't swatch very well, just because they're kind of a little bit of a weird consistency, but I wanted to get lots of pigmentation on there. But yeah, these colors to me look identical. If you can tell a difference, then yay for you, but I cannot tell a difference in these 2 shades at all. Next color I have is the dark brown shade right here from Wet n Wild on top, and then Cypress Umber is on bottom. Now there is a little bit of a difference. The Cypress Umber is a little tiny bit darker, but as you can see, the pigmentation on these are identical. I can't really tell a difference other than the Cypress Umber is a smidge darker, but the tone of them, everything about them is exactly the same. Next up is the Primavera dupe. Primavera is on the bottom, whereas the Wet n Wild is on top. Obviously these do not match that well. Primavera is a lot more champagne, whereas the Wet n Wild is a lot more gold undertoned. I actually love the Primavera color way better, and to me it's more pigmented. It has a lot more shimmer to it than the Wet n Wild does, but they're pretty similar. but there's obviously a color difference in these two. Like I said, the Wet n Wild does have a shine to it, but not like the Anastasia. But yeah, so this is these two colors. So this would be Wet n Wild on top and Primavera on bottom. Okay, so next up is the dupe for Love Letter. Love Letter is actually on the bottom, whereas the Wet n Wild is on top. Now there is a little bit of difference. The Anastasia is way more pigmented. This color actually didn't impress me that much in the Wet n Wild, just because it's kind of patchy, and it's a little harder to work with, but the color is pretty spot on. I think the Love Letter is a smidge darker, and the pigmentation of Love Letter is a lot better than the Wet n Wild, but that is what the colors look like side by side. You really can't tell. I mean, if you're like this, you really can't tell the difference in them, except for Love Letter is way better pigmentation. Next up is the dupe for Red Ochre. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of a difference in these two shades. Wet n Wild is on top, Red Ochre is on the bottom. Red Ochre is obviously a little bit darker, but the pigmentation of both of these is really good. Not like that pink shade, the dupe for Love Letter. The pigmentation is really good. The colors, I mean, to me, they're pretty close, except for, like I said, Red Ochre is a hair darker, but the colors are really close. Next up is the dupe for Real Gar. Now, Real Gar is on the bottom, where the Wet n Wild is on top. This one is the same kind of deal. Real Gar is a little bit darker than the Wet n Wild, but the consistency of them is pretty much the same. The pigmentation is spot on. But like I said, Real Gar is just a little bit darker. Next up is Warm Taupe. Warm Taupe is on the bottom, and the Wet n Wild is on top. The Warm Taupe is a little bit darker and quite a bit more pigmented than the Wet n Wild on top, but the colors are pretty similar. The pigmentation's not bad with the Wet n Wild, but it's just a little more powdery than the Warm Taupe. So that is the two of those. Next up is Bon Fresco. Hopefully I'm not butchering the name of that. So Bon Fresco is on the bottom, where the Wet n Wild is on top. These colors are similar if you look at them from afar, but Bon Fresco is a lot deeper of a color than the Wet n Wild. Wet n Wild is really chalky. I don't really care for this color that much. It's not as pigmented at all as the Bon Fresco, and Bon Fresco is a lot deeper, and I feel like the Wet n Wild's a little warm compared to the Anastasia. And last but not least is Antique Bronze. Antique Bronze is on the bottom, and the Wet n Wild is on top. The Wet n Wild is a lot more golden undertoned than the Antique Bronze. Antique Bronze to me is just straight bronze, whereas the Wet n Wild is a lot warmer and it has a gold undertone instead of that bronzy tone. But yeah, so these are the colors. These two are quite a bit different. Pigmentation's good. Anastasia on this side, and then we'll put Wet n Wild on this side is kind of my goal. So I'm going to go ahead and set my eyes exactly the same. I'm going to take the NYX eyeshadow base in ESB 01, which is my holy grail eyeshadow base. I'm going to set both eyes with this eyeshadow base, just because this is what I would normally do anyways. So I don't want to stray from my norm too much. Okay, so now that the eyes are primed, I'm going to go ahead and set my eyes. Now, the great news about this Rose in the Air palette is it does come with a matte white shade. If you know me, you know that that's kind of like a big deal for me if it has a white shadow for me to set my eyes with. So, the Wet n Wild does not have any colors, it just has numbers. So I'm going to tell you the numbers, and then at the end we'll swatch. Obviously, there's only 10 colors in here and there's 14, so there's going to be a few colors that don't have dupes, but all in all, it's pretty much the same if you compare them to each other, and I will have comparisons and all that stuff in here. So I'm going to take color number, I'm going to take number 6 in the Wet n Wild palette, which is this white shade right here. I'm going to take that on just a fluffy brush, and I'm going to set that down. In the Modern Renaissance palette, I'm going to take Tempera, which is this shade right here, and I'm going to take that. I cleaned off the brush, and I'm going to set the side down. So far, I can't tell the difference in these two shades. Okay, so now on to eyeshadow. I'm gonna take this transition shade right here, and this is in number 10. So I'm gonna take number 10, and I'm just going to put this in the crease, and this is gonna be our transition shade. These Wet n Wild shadows are pretty pigmented, as you can see. They've got some pigment, so that is great news. So as you can see, there is quite a bit of pigment with this color, and I love this color. It's probably one of my favorite colors ever, is this shade right here. As you can see, it blends out nicely. It's a nice texture with these shadows just because they're not too powdery. Okay, so I messed up. So number 2 equals Tempera. Number 10 equals Raw Sienna, which is this shade right here. And let's see how close it is to number 10. Wet n Wild has just as much pigment as the ABH does. So I'm just getting this nice and blended. I always love really blended out transition shades. So this is what they look like so far. I can't tell the difference. Can you? Like, seriously, they look identical. Okay, so now we're gonna take number 2, which is this shade right here, and this would be the dupe for Real Gar right here. So I'm gonna take that on a blending brush, and we're just gonna work this into the crease and on the lid. Now we're going to take Real Gar, which is this shade right here. I am noticing that I'm dipping into the pans about the same, so they're pretty close to the same, like, pigment. Number 6 shadow in the Wet n Wild again, and just kind of build this up a little bit more. I'm just impressed already that they match. Take this purple shade right. I'm gonna take this on a shader brush, and this would be a dupe for Juan Fresco. Totally butchered that. This is going to be an inner corner shade. You really can't see it, so let's go ahead and cut the crease. We're just going to do that. Okay, so now I'm going to take my Tarte Shape Tape, and I'm going to cut the crease just so you guys can really see these colors. Okay, so now that I have my crease cut, I'm going to go back in with the matte white shades, and I'm just going to set that down before I put any shadow on top. So I'm just gonna kind of pack the white bone shade on top. And as you can see, it's pretty pigmented. And then I'm going to take Tempera from the Modern Renaissance palette. And as you can see, there's really not much of a difference between the two when they're actually on your lid. The purple shade right here, and I'm just going to pack that on a shader brush. That in the cut crease. Now I'm going to take Bon Fresco, which is this shade right here. These colors in the pan look identical. So I can kill a little bit of a difference when they're actually on the lid. Bon Fresco is actually a little tiny bit darker on the eye. Pretty close. The pink shade right here, and I'm just gonna take this on a crease brush, and we're gonna pop this in the outer half of the eye. Now this color to me is not as pigmented as the other shades are. You have to build it up a little bit to get that pigmentation. It's super pretty once you get it built. My favorite color in the palette, which is Love Letter. And pop this in the outer part. Gonna keep kind of packing this on to get the intensity, but as you can see, they're pretty much the same. Warm shade right here, which is the dupe for Real Gar, and I'm just going to build that intensity back up just a little bit. I always feel like I lose a little bit. Okay, so now I'm going to go in with Real Gar, just right here. And I am cleaning off my brush in between shadows so they don't get mixed up. So I just disclaimer, I am cleaning off the brush. And then some of them have different, I have duplicates of the same brush, so that too. Okay, so now I'm going to go in with this shade right here, number 9, and I'm just going to take that with a crease brush. And this is going to be our outer corner shade. And I'm going to take this up into the crease just a tiny bit. Cypress Umber, which is this one right here, and I'm just going to pack this on the outer corner. Now there is fallout with this shade on both sides, so it's not more on one side than it is the other, so it is on both sides. The dupe for Primavera, which is this shade right here. It's just like a goldish shimmer shade. And take Primavera, and I'm just going to do the exact same thing. Primavera has a lot more pigmentation in my opinion. We're going to take the color that is a dupe for Red Ochre, which is this shade right here, and we're going to just kind of add this try this under as well. Take red ochre, which is this one right here, and just take a little bit of it, pop it in like this, and then I'm going to take a little bit and drag it that is a dupe for Love Letter, and just pop it right back in the middle. I really want to show a little bit of the pink. I'm taking Love Letter on this side. Then add some liner. I'm going to take my NYX Epic Ink Liner. So now I'm going to go ahead and apply some falsies, and I will be right back.